The two speakers tonight, as most people know, are on my right in more ways than one. We have Jim Power, who is a
Don't prejudge me, please.
Who is a well-known economist with Friends Force. He's the chief economist with Friends Force, a well-known commentator in the media in Ireland. So we're very pleased to have Jim to debate us, and we thank him a lot for coming to the debate organised by the Socialist Party. On my left, we have Joe Higgins, who is the spokesperson for the Socialist Party tonight. Joe, as most people would know, is a former TD until 2007 and will be challenging in the European and the local elections in June. My name is Fiona O'Loughlin. If it's acceptable to the meeting, I will chair the meeting tonight. I am a member of the Socialist Party, but I will endeavour to do my best to be fair in the discussion. We want to state from the outset there's probably going to be various differences of opinion in this meeting, but that at all times the meeting should be conducted in a fraternal manner. So I think we can get agreement from the meeting that that's the way it's going to be. So I bring in Joe first for 20-25 minutes, absolutely max, and then we'll take in Jim, and then we'll open the floor to discussion. Okay? Do you want the microphone? We need the microphone.
Okay, well, Chairwoman and friends, Cordia, thank you very much for coming, and thank Jim Power from Friends Force for agreeing to a debate on the critical issues of the day in terms of the economic crisis. Is there a solution, and who should pay the price of the situation that we're in at the present time? Obviously, these are critical issues for working people, for the vast majority of the population at the present time, and any clarification or elucidation that flows from a debate is welcome and indeed necessary, even where there are sharply different views. And as Fiona says, those views tonight will be expressed in a respectful manner. Now, in the days of the so-called Celtic tiger, if you remember that animal, we socialists were at pains to point out that what was going on at the time in economic terms wasn't sustainable, that the factors inherent in it meant the inevitability of a crisis. On the one hand, the normal cycles of capitalism, the inner workings of capitalism itself, of boom and slump. But on top of that, we identified in particular both international factors and national factors that would enormously complicate the economic situation as things went on. In particular, in the United States, which of course is a key motor of the world economy, the huge and growing indebtedness of both corporate and personal debt, borrowing at a huge degree, and of course in this country as well, some of the specific features that have now really come home to roost, we identified at the time. We have to say that it was done to a rather sceptical audience at the time. Sadly today, we don't have to belabor the extent of the crisis that we now face. It's blindingly obvious to everybody in society, and more particularly blindingly obvious and felt in the savage assault that is now underway on living standards, on public services, and so on. And when we have headlines of a projected fall of perhaps 6 or 8% of national income in 2009 alone, followed by further falls in 2010, that alone indicates the seriousness of the situation, where the disastrous budget deficit could be perhaps 20 billion, we don't really know. It seems to be a movable feast. But we have in particular the high-profile job massacres on a weekly basis now, and unfortunately the prediction that 500,000 people can be unemployed in a few short 1 to 2 to 2.5 years. So I don't think we really need to spend too much time belabouring the facts of the crisis tonight. The reality are evident, and we know and working people feel the impacts on a daily basis already. And certainly the workers in Waterford Glass and in SR Technics, perhaps the first high-profile casualties of brutal and mass sackings, know full well the extent of the crisis. And as we've seen since, the savage attack on wages in terms of public sector workers, in terms of private sector workers' wage cuts that are going on relentlessly, and cuts now on those dependent on social welfare. So I think we can concentrate on the two subheadings of the debate tonight. Is there a solution, and who should pay? And this is where we would come into a very sharp conflict indeed with Jim Power and with economists who base themselves, like Jim, on the continuation of the capitalist market as the basis globally and in Ireland for the production of what human society needs for life and a reasonable comfort for people. Because Jim's formula for a solution is more of the same that has brought us to this point, a repeat of the very factors that exacerbated the global and the Irish crisis. In the quarterly economic outlook of Friends First, which Jim Power authors, and which was produced only 2 weeks ago, this is what Jim says. In 2004, the Washington Consensus outlined prescriptions for economic growth in developing countries. These proposals have obvious validity for a developed economy such as Ireland, which now needs to reinvent itself, having become too dependent on one sector, namely construction. Now, what the Washington Consensus really means is the neoliberal agenda, the agenda, for example, that was pursued most brutally and first dramatically in a political sense by Ronald Reagan in the United States and Margaret Thatcher in Britain in the 1980s, and since intensified. And a number of factors are elucidated, and Jim elucidates them in his document: the liberalisation of financial markets, the privatisation of state-owned enterprises, and the Washington Consensus also enumerates very specifically deregulation, abolition of regulations that impede market entry or restrict competition. Though I noticed, Jim, that you didn't actually spell this one out in this particular document. I don't know if it was embarrassment as a result of where we are today as a result of deregulation in the financial markets particularly. But these are the very factors that exacerbated the current crisis to disastrous proportions. Now, I don't really have time to go into it, but there are, of course, very serious underlying factors in the way capitalism itself works, and inherent crisis in that, apart from these specific features that have been exacerbated up to the present crisis, but perhaps others can take them up in the debate. But the fundamental crisis of the system is, of course, based on contradictions within the system itself, the tendency to overproduction, not in the sense of creating too many goods that humanity doesn't need, because human beings, as those who are thirsty and hungry and have no shelter, need far more goods, but in the sense of that people can afford to buy. And of course the other is the crisis of profitability and the tendency for profit, the rate of profit, to fall, which means then a destruction of capital and unemployment, etc. These are fundamental issues that are inherent in the present situation, but then that is enormously exacerbated by the financial crash, and now the crash as a result gone into the so-called real economy. Now, of course, in global terms, it was the subprime mortgage markets that created by the financial institutions in the United States, allowing a free hand to profiteer at will by any means possible was what triggered off the present crisis as far as the global situation is concerned.